Okay, welcome everyone to the CASAS Implementation Technical Assistance webinar. Today we'll have Linda Taylor, the Director of Assessment Development from CASAS, Jane Aguez, the Director of Program Development, Laurel Duro with Technology Support. And my name is Olga Escamilla, and I'm going to be your host and moderator. And we have Linda Taylor, and she's the Director of Assessment Development. We have Jane Aguez, and she's the Director of Program Development. And then we have Laurel Duro, and he is the CASAS Technology Support. So we welcome them. We appreciate them being available to help us through this technical assistance webinar.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Beth Ponder with Train PD at TCAL. I just want to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar and again reiterate how much we appreciate the CASAS team being willing to take some time out of their busy schedules to work with us to answer our questions as we begin implementation in the state of Texas. So thank you for being here. And so at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Linda Taylor with CASAS.
We really appreciate all of your interest and what we're planning to do in this session. We're going to, we've compiled all your survey questions and created responses for them. So that's going to take up the bulk of the session, but we also do want to show you a few things on the CASAS website to keep you going. And if we have time, we'll show you the new e-test sampler and some things about reports and give you a chance, if you have other topics or things that occur to you since you answered the survey, we can still take this opportunity to answer them. So without further ado, let's go on. Now, what we've done is we've divided the responses into some categories. And the first one is test administration and scoring. One question that was asked was, what is the timeline for paper test setups and for e-test setups with remote computer systems, CBOs? Well, we didn't exactly understand everything about the question, but what we can tell you, and I know some of you who answered the survey said that you have not yet started using CASAS, and I know a number of you on the call are already using CASAS, so I think we have a mix of folks on the call. But if you have not yet started, and if you're planning on using paper tests, then the first step is to complete the training and then place an order. And so for that, we would suggest you allow 7 to 10 working days. If you're planning to use the computer testing, which is CASAS e-test, for the situation of a single agency that has one site, we would suggest that you allow 2 to 4 weeks for the staff to complete the training and to get set up. And if you're a larger agency than that, then you should allow a little more time to make sure you can go through all the hoops and get everyone trained. So hopefully that gives you some sense of how long it takes to get started. You know, as you can hopefully well imagine, it's been a very busy time this summer and now into the fall, as many agencies around the country are starting to use CASAS for the first time. So we're doing our best to be as responsive as we can. If you have an emergency, please put that in your email or put it in your phone message, and we'll try to address your concerns as soon as possible. And if it's not an emergency, that would be great if you can let us know, and then we still will get back to you as soon as we can, but we won't be rushing. All right, so that question was about the NRS levels. And the comment was that the NRS levels don't seem to match with grade levels for CASAS, or they don't match the level of the test given. So what we want to do is go through this series of charts with you. These are all on our CASAS website, and hopefully before we end today we can show you exactly where they are on the CASAS website. But these were just literally cut and pasted from the CASAS website. And what you need to do is to pay attention to the program and the modality. So because these charts differ accordingly. So if it's an ABE student or that you're interested in knowing about, and it's about reading, then these are the NRS levels for ABE and ASE. Then here are the reading goal score ranges. And on this chart, we also have the breakout by grade level. We do really recommend that as much as possible you work with these scale score ranges, but if you need the grade level, they're right here in the same chart. So these are how these NRS levels on the left relate to the CASAS score ranges on the right and the grade levels. Then the next slide is for ABE math, and you can see the levels 1 to 6. The names of them are slightly different than for reading and slightly different than they used to be for math, but nonetheless 1 to 6. And on this side of the chart, right side, you can see the score ranges and the corresponding grade levels. So if you compare the two, they are slightly different. So you need to make sure you're looking at the right chart. The next slide is ESL reading. And in this rendition, this is according for WIOA 1 purposes, where the levels go 7 to 12, but this is, you could just translate this as levels 1 through 6 for ESL, and then advanced exit from ESL. And so here are the score ranges and the related grade levels. So when you get up to 235, that's the end of advanced ESL, and then if students are moving out of ESL and into ABE or some other step in their path, whether it's a job or more training, then you can use this scale score here, and that this would be 9th grade and above. After this, if they do transition into ABE, you would need to start using the reading goals and the math goals test for the student if they're placed in ABE. But the scores are comparable. The next question was about ESL, and the comment was that ESL students are scoring way above their level. I have students in NRS 5 and 6 that cannot speak any English. This makes it difficult when they're assigned to upper-level classes, and instructors have to teach multi-level. So our comment here is that what we've seen is that this can often happen if only the reading test is given. But if you are giving both the listening and the reading test, which we do recommend, and then you are placing the student on the lower of the two scores, you should not have a problem of the student placing too high. Usually we find, or often we find, that the students score lower in listening, and especially when students have studied English in their native country, they often come in having good reading skills, but much lower listening and speaking skills. So it's very important to include listening and to use that score when it's the lower score to place a student in a lower level. So hopefully that does address your question, and I guess if it doesn't, please do contact us later and we can try to troubleshoot more specifically what's going on in your program. All right, let me go on to the next. So the comment here was about understanding scoring to see if the applicants are testing out of range. So here we reproduced something that is in the training that we provided in April and in the summer, but just to review, that this is a score we call a score conversion chart. It shows the raw score and the CASAS scale score. And so out of range at the low end of the test is an asterisk, or sometimes it's a dash. And so if the student scores 6 or less correct, they won't get a scale score. This happens to be the reading goals appraisal. So that is going to be an out-of-range score on this particular test. And then once they get up to 8 correct, they will get a scale score. And then at the top of the range, you can see that the highest accurate range score is a 243, but then we have what we call diamond scores, or also we call them conservative estimates, and they're all 1 point above the highest accurate range score. And these scores can be used. We recommend that when you're pre-testing, that is a new student at intake, that if you get a diamond score, that you should retest at the next higher level, because you are not sure, they might be much higher than this, perhaps. But if it's a post-test, you do have the option of using this diamond score and not retesting. So that's sort of a definition of these out-of-range scores and the accurate range scores. Now there's a few comments that relate to getting a lot of these diamond scores, and that would be the ones at the high end of the scale. And one of the reasons that can happen is to do, especially in terms of the intake process, is that the use of the locator or leading up to the locator. So this is some wording that we've recently come up with that we are putting out. It'll be in our FAQs on the website soon. But I would like to go through it with you, and hopefully this will help. And those of you on e-test are using the locator on intake, only on intake, not later. And those of you who are doing paper testing would need to be using the appraisal. So that would you can substitute, if you're doing paper testing, substitute appraisal for locator. But that initial test is the one that you use to determine the appropriate pretest. And we have found that it is a reliable way of doing that to find the appropriate pretest. But with any assessment, no test is perfect, so a small percentage of the test takers will score inevitably in the inaccurate, that is the low range, or in that diamond range at the high end on their pretest, even though the locator directed the student into a certain pretest form. So, as I just mentioned, those test takers would need to be retested at the higher or lower test level. But we do continually monitor the cut points for the locator to determine which pretest should be indicated. And we do periodically adjust, and we have recently actually adjusted that locator cut point for the math test based on input from the field. So it's something that we do continually monitor, we take action on, as we have just done, and we have already been monitoring the effect of that slight adjustment to the math locator for the math goals, and saw already an improvement in the percentage of students that needed to be retested. So we are committed to implementing these improvements as needed, and we do appreciate your input if you're having issues. But we will say that a certain percent, around 10 to 15% of retesting, is something that simply can't be avoided. But you can still take some steps to improve your process. We're doing what we can on our end, but there's some ways that you can strengthen the effect of the locator, and some of these are these, that even at intake, if you can show students the sample test items, which are in our new e-test sampler. They're also on our website. They're free. So before you sit them down to take a test, you can have them take these sample test items so they become familiar with the format of the test items. And if you're doing paper testing, the paper format sample items are there. And if you're doing e-testing, the e-test sampler is in the e-test format now. So that we highly recommend as a very good testing practice. And another thing that we recommend is that you, before a student begins the locator, to caution them against guessing. In some tests that are high performance, like the GED or some other kind of test where you want them to get as many right as possible because they want to pass the test, then you might encourage guessing. But on a CASAS test, the point is to get an accurate reflection of their skills and to put them in the appropriate instructional level. So if they guess, and if they happen to be good at guessing, then they're going to be, in effect, shooting themselves in the foot because they're going to wind up in a class that's too difficult for them. And, or in this case, if they guess on the locator, they're going to wind up in a pretest that's too difficult. And the converse is also true. If they guess poorly, they may wind up in a test that's too easy and top out. So in any situation, it's better to advise them not to guess so that they can get the right next test and so that they can get in a class that's going to best serve their needs.
We have a couple of questions or comments. So one of our participants said, is it required to retest on pretest for the diamonds by CASAS or TWC? So is this something that you're recommending from CASAS, or is this a TWC requirement? That's a good question, Glenda. We have another one. We have another one that says, are students penalized for non-responses?
Yes, they will get it wrong. What I think you want to tell them in that regard is that if they don't know the answer, then they should skip the question. Because if they guess, then what kicks in is what I was just describing, that if they guess well, they'll get placed too high, and if they guess poorly, they'll get placed too low. So if they don't know, it's better to skip the question, and it will be marked wrong, but that's appropriate because they really don't know the answer. So from the CASAS point of view, it's our recommendation that for pretesting that students be retested at the higher level. But I believe that the software, once it's updated, will accept a diamond score at a pretest because that's what we've been talking about recently.
Mahalia and Lori and Fabiana. So is it required to retest on pretest for the diamonds by CASAS or TWC? And then she says the question is it recommended or required?
So good question. So right now, I mean, our guidance and our assessment guide, and Fabiana can jump in there if I'm not correct, is that all the test publisher guidelines should be followed when administering the test. In terms of teams, we're going to correct teams to where the scores that you can enter are, you know, we're just going to basically say, this is the form and this is the allowability of the form, and it's going to be the entire range of whatever that form is. But we do not, I mean, we just say follow the test publisher's guidelines and whatever the training has been from CASAS in terms of if it's a diamond score, what you should do next. I mean, we just basically that's exactly what we put in our assessment guide.
Yeah, and Linda, if you could specify, this is that language in the test administration booklet? If so, that might be something we can just highlight in the assessment guide for folks that are wanting to find where that language is.
Yes, it is. It's in the test administration manual.
Okay.
It does not let us enter the diamond scores yet. And then another one is, what happens if someone diamonds out of reading but not listening?
Well, I can tell you from a TWC standpoint, I mean, you would want to just put the scores in. You know, testing for us is obviously, I mean, we want the post-test so we can make a game, but there's also eligibility that's included in there as well. So if this is a pre-test and you're, you know, basically giving someone reading and math and they test out of range on both of those, then there's kind of nowhere to go from there. If you're giving them reading and math and, you know, they're okay in reading and they're out of range in math, then they're still eligible based off of their reading scores in terms of eligibility. So it's two different things. Establishing the baseline, establishing eligibility with that first test, that first CASAS test, whichever it is, whether it's reading, math, listening, or, you know, it doesn't matter, I guess is what I'm saying. And we are just going to code things to accept whatever the score ranges are for each of those different instruments and whatever the forms are that you're using so that you can put them in teams. If it happens to be at the very tippy top of that test level or that instrument type, then that's on you guys at the local level to say and determine whether or not the person is eligible for the program or not based off of the assessments. Teams is just going to allow you to enter the information. I don't know if that helps or if that answers any questions or not.
Oh, okay. So what I have now up on the screen, all of these comments are basically the ones that we're saying, you know, the teams needs to be able to be changed to allow these out-of-range scores. And so, yes, we just, in fact, had a nice conversation with Mahalia today. And Mahalia, if you chime in here, but what we understand is that the next update of teams is hopefully scheduled for mid-October, and that in it there will be the opportunity to enter the diamond scores so that all these comments will be addressed when that happens.
Correct.
All right,
so we're going to allow you guys to be able to enter the diamond scores in teams, but it's still going to be on you guys from a test administration standpoint to determine, is this our student, meaning is it an eligibility, do they meet eligibility criteria to be in the program? The second thing is about the post-testing, or what is the measurable skills gain that individual hopes to get. So if you get them and you test them on CASAS and they're out of range at the tippy top of every, you know, both reading and math, for instance, and they don't have a high school equivalency, sure, we can still accept them, but you have to understand that there's no post-test to give them that's going to give them the gain because they're at the very top. And so you're going to be limited on the measurable skills gains that they can earn for you. So those are just the type of things I think at the local level you guys have to be thinking about. But teams is we're just going to open it up and allow whatever the score ranges are that you guys will be able to enter them moving forward.
Okay. We have some other questions that related to either e-testing or TOPS Pro. I'm going to, I think, Olga, at this point we should hand the reins over to Laurel.
Hello, everybody. All right. So these e-testing and TOPS Pro questions, the first one here, a user said they had a situation where test screens did not initially load. This, of course, made the students nervous as they were losing time. So if the screens do not load, you have to make sure they're Windows 10 machines, and if they are, that's great. If they're not, that would be one reason to cause the screens not to load.
On TOPS Pro, is there a way to generate an individual skills profile for only one tester? Every time we try it, shows everyone who has tested.
There is a way to generate a report for an individual on the individual skills profile for one tester. Yes, there is.
So there are two types of individual skills profile. One is it's just that, individual skills profile, and it's one student. What you may be selecting is the individual skills profile summary, and that's why you're getting a whole class or a whole lot of students. So just if you only select individual skills profile, hopefully that will work for you.
Right, and I can show you how to do that as well. So to answer the first question about the screen being blank, if that happens and you know you're on Windows 10, what you want to do is find Internet Explorer and then go here to the gear icon and click there. All right, when this comes up, what we're going to do is click on the Advanced tab and then just click Reset. Even if you're using Chrome or Mozilla Firefox, because they still use Internet Explorer on the back end, you can go here, click Reset, and then click OK, restart your browser, and then it should come up without any other issues. The second question, test report generation lags. If no internet or CASAS website is lagging, will lock out teachers. That is correct. Of course, you have to be connected to the internet. You need at least, I want to say it's 1 gig upload and 1 gig download speeds in order for that. And there it is there. I'm sorry. It's all here. Agencies must have steady internet access at any time during testing and e-tests and when generating reports in TE. It is up to your agency to meet or exceed the system requirements for e-tests online, which means that all devices should have a stable internet connection with 1 megabit per second of download bandwidth for every testing station. Okay, so without internet, of course, the system becomes unresponsive. All right, and then we'll go here, complicated data entry to sign students up to take the test, overwhelming data entry to retrieve test records after testing. So you can determine which data or which demographic data you want to have collected in e-test.
With the demographics, you can choose to collect no demographics, and the directions are on this PowerPoint. So you can go in and set up in your templates and decide which, if any, demographics you want. So you can, if you, knowing that you're already collecting all of that demographics elsewhere, then you can unselect all of those demographics, and all the person needs to do, the test taker needs to do, is put in their ID, and it will take them then right to the test, and you can skip all of the demographic entry information.
Right, and so that, what Jane was explaining is correct. Those steps are there, and here's just a quick overview of those steps. You log into eTest Online, you click on Testing Session Templates, and then you would select the session or template that you want to edit, click the Edit icon, and then here in the Data tab, as you can see here, anything that's on the selected side is what the student will be presented. So if you only want, and student info cannot be removed, of course, because that's student ID and name. But any other of this, any other option here, you can move over to the available side. Once you move it over to the available side and click Save, whatever is left over on the selected side is what the student will be presented with. So if you remove everything and leave only student info, when the student logs in with their ID, if they're a new student, they will only be asked to enter their first, middle, and last name. If they are a returning student and they enter their ID, it'll come up and verify their name and say, hey, are you Laurel Duro? They click yes, and they're then presented with a test menu from there. So making sure students end test instead of starting a new test session. Okay, now that's shouldn't be a problem. You can actually set up your testing sessions to administer individual modalities. So if you only want reading tests administered, you can create test sessions to only administer reading tests, listening tests, or math tests, whichever tests you want. Separately, you can have them all set up. If you know how to do it, you're free to do it. You can edit those test sessions that are already pre-installed in your system, or you can give us a call and ask us to assist you with that. Okay? And then, let's see. CASAS server is down with no announcement. Yeah, unfortunately, there was an issue with our server. There was an update that didn't get loaded correctly, so it caused the server to reboot without us knowing. Back here about a little over 3 weeks ago. And so we weren't aware of it, of course, until the next day when people were testing or trying to test, and they got the error message that they weren't able to test. So we apologize for the disruption. It's kind of hard, again, with technology to know when something like this will happen. So it's kind of hard to put out an email or something on our website to say, hey, the server is down, and we're currently working on it. So what we do is when they call in, we try our best to respond to each person, and then when we figure out what's going on, we try to send out emails to those who have responded about the problem that we're having. Tests are being given, but available test balance do not align. Well, the reason the available test balances don't align there is because even if you go to reports, CASAS, e-test, test administration, if you're looking in e-test, and here, we'll go back here. Hopefully I have some. If you're looking here and it gives you a number of tests, this number here includes all the tests that have ever been given in this test session. So that's including locators and your pretest, right? So now, locators don't charge you a WTU. So if this number, of course, is higher than your test administrations, then of course the number is not going to be the same because this keeps track of all the tests that have been given, locators and pretest, where your WTUs are only going to decline or decrease when a pretest is taken. Okay, good deal. So now your WTUs available, it shows here, and if you go to organization, agencies, and double click on your agency, it'll bring up your agency information page, and you'll see how many WTUs you have available. You can also go here to test administrations, and it'll show you the times you purchased your WTUs, how many were purchased, and how many were used. Okay, so now what will happen in this instance, if you purchased WTUs recently, it'll show the last time they were purchased, so it's going to take away from the 653 first. Once all the 653 are gone, then it will begin to take away from the next one. So that was something to generate the individual skills profile report for an individual student. All right, so you go to reports, test results, skills profile, individual skills profile. Okay, once you have your information selected as far as your agency, if you have the specific sites you want to choose, you would select it here. You can choose your sites from here. I recommend just leaving it at agency level. That way, if you have agency level login, you will be able to look at all sites at one time. You don't have to filter that way. Then once you have your site selected or agency, in your general settings, you scroll down to the bottom to special options. If you want to show the grade level equivalency, you go ahead and check the box that says show grade level equivalency. Once you've selected that, over in program years on the left, under the Report Setup Navigator, select in program years. It gives you a list of all of your students. So what you want to do is uncheck the box at the very top, and then you can either filter by student ID, type in the ID number you want to generate the report for, or you can filter by name. Select and contains. I always use contains because this way you can type in part of the name, either the first or the last name. It doesn't have to be exact, and it will pull it up. And then once you find that student, you go ahead and check the box here. Now it's only selected for that student. And once we click generate, and so now it only generates for this student if they've tested. There you go. And you'll see that it's only page 1 of 2. Of course, the second page is your criteria page, but it's only generating for that one student. So now we'll get back to these other questions here. question should not have intervene on e-test. The intervene button comes in handy if there's an emergency. The proctor can click the intervene button on that student's test and disconnect. What that does is whatever question that student was on at the time, it will stop right there, and however much time they had left, they will have that same amount of time when they're able to come back to complete the test. Now, we say no more than 2 days for a student to come back. If it takes longer than 2 days, then you will have to abort the test, and the student will have to start all over. We don't want the student to be able to go, leave, and study or find some answers for the test, come back a week later, and get a better score on it. So if it's an emergency, you can go ahead and click the intervene button and click disconnect. That allows, again, the student to stop and leave at that question. When they come back, they can pick up at that same question with the correct amount of time that they had left before, and to finish their test. All right? And then we have permission error leading to closing all tabs in TOPS Pro. Normally, when this happens, it's just an anomaly. Either there's been temporary internet loss, or there was a file that may have locked up the program, and so it shuts itself down. But once you log back in, you should be able to pick up. And in this case, if that does happen, once internet is stopped, the timing stops on the test automatically. It will not time out whatever question the student is on. When everything is reset and pulled back up, the student will have the same amount of time to finish the test, and they will pick up on the question that they left off on or where the error happened. Okay? All reports are checked by default. Yeah, we need a little more information on that one. When you say all reports are checked by default, depending on which reports you run, certain criteria is automatically selected because that's due to the federal standards and what they're looking for. So some of that information is already selected or pre-selected. All right, let's see. So I will turn this back over to Linda, and she will be able to assist from here.
Thanks, Laurel. We had some people respond to the survey by saying that, as I said earlier, that they haven't started yet and they're waiting to hear. And so, I guess at this point, is there anyone who would like to say something generally about how it's going, or just there is a little bit of time to have that kind of conversation now if you want. Just want to open the floor.
We have a general comment from Risa Wingfield. She said, "We like the test a lot. I'm impressed that the scale scores on the appraisal so often matches or nearly matches the final test scale score. That seems to indicate a lot of internal test validity." Thank you, Risa.
Thank you, Risa. That's so nice to hear, and that's not unexpected, but it's still nice to hear. Student friendly. Okay, thank you, Sarah. I would like to see if I can get onto the CASAS website.
My only issue has been a few people who have never used a mouse before.
Well, for that, what I would suggest is that you, if you can, invest in some touchscreen devices to give the test, whether it's iPads or Chrome tablets with touchscreen enabled, or even a large monitor. You can get them, or a laptop with touchscreen. And that way, for students that are not comfortable or familiar with the mouse, they can easily interact. It's really helpful, I think, to have at least some touchscreen devices available in your testing cabinet.
Right. Sasha says iPads help with that. Sarah says the test is super student-friendly. And then Glenda says, where is the list of touchscreen devices that can be used? Is there one on the website?
Yes, and Christine is going to send that in a second, looks like.
Josh Curry says, we're using eTest here in Angelina College. It is going well. Even our less tech-savvy teachers are testing students with no trouble. Awesome.
Okay, there is a last comment from Gabriela Gandara, which I'm going to ask Laurel to respond to. It's that a student took ESL listening and reading and scored top. So he then had to take reading and math goals. In other words, they topped out of ESL and now they were ABE. When we run the report for that day, only the ESL results are showing. Laurel, can you answer that?
Okay, so a student took ESL listening and reading and scored top. So he then had to take reading and math goals. When we run the report for that day, only his ESL results are showing on the report. Okay. And that is because TOPS Pro looks at the hierarchy of instructional programs. And because ESL is the lowest instructional program, it's going to look at that one first instead of the goals. So what you would need to do is, if I'm not mistaken, to get the reports, depending on which report it is that you're running, you would have to remove the ESL, which of course you don't want to do that, but the only way that the goals testing are going to come up is if the ESL program enrollment is not there. If it's there, it's always going to look at ESL first because that's the lowest instructional program. And so students who are in that case, in that situation, the goals, of course, isn't approved for ESL, so that's why you won't see both tests. You only see the ESL test that were given prior to.
You know, I do see there's one more, a little bit technical question about the list of rights for user groups. But before addressing that, since we're close to an hour, I just want to, if you can see on the screen the CASAS homepage, I want to point you in the direction on the right side in the middle where it says What's New. And the first entry there is News and Updates Webinars. So this is something, I mean, it's great that we're able to meet with all of you and answer all your Texas-specific questions today. But I want you to know that every month we are offering CASAS News and Update webinar, and in fact the next one is tomorrow. And so if you click on this link, it will take you to a page that will tell you the upcoming webinars and what they're going to cover. And all the previous, not all, but the recent previous webinars are on this page. So if you missed last month and you'd like to either just see the PDF of the PowerPoint or actually listen to it, you can do that for the August, July, and even June sessions. You know, and every month we do, it is a great opportunity now for us to share with you some of the new reports that are available, and it looks like we don't have time today to talk about some of the new reports and features that are coming out, and they are these days, especially for the new goals series. So, for example, if any of you use HiSET, the math HiSET, likelihood of passing the HiSET, is just going to be coming out on Friday. And the math CCR report will soon appear in the individual skills profile. So these things are covered, you know, clearly and in depth, and those are some of the topics for tomorrow's session. So please use this as an ongoing resource for you to stay updated about what's new, and if you join in and you want to ask questions on those webinars, you're certainly welcome to do that as well, in addition to reaching out to us at any time. And if I'm going back, if you look at the top left CASAS logo where it says Product Overviews, I just want to make sure you all are aware that if you go then Product Overviews and then down on the left here, Assessments, this is where you can see reading goals and math goals. And on the math goals page, for example, we've just reorganized these pages, and this is something that is new. It wasn't there when we trained earlier in the year, even in June. The Math Goals Test Blueprint is something that's now available. We had the reading one available before, but this is something that I think will be very helpful to you in understanding the content of the series. We have the big picture of the content and then which CCR standards are being measured in each category. So this is just an example of the kind of thing that you'll find on the Math Goals page. You'll see remember I told you that those same charts, the grade level equivalence chart is there. A lot of great information for both reading and math. And if you want to see the sample test items, click here. There's a lot of ways to get to the sample test items, but just to make sure you know that you can get there. Let's see here. CASAS e-test sampler takes you to the e-test version, and then on either the reading goals or the math goals page, you can get to these. These are in the format of the paper test booklets, the test items.
We also had a question from Keegan Reed about pretest. Once students have pretested in a test session, how do we create a test session that takes advantage of the next assigned test function of CASAS? How do we ensure that the student takes the next assigned test without being presented with the appraisal the next time they sign into the test?
I mean, even as a non-tech support person, I can tell you that it's only the first time a student tests that they'll get the locator. And then when they sign in next to take their next test, they will automatically not be given the locator again. So that is how it's programmed. Laurel, do you want to comment further on that? Is there any way that could happen?
Sasha says they have students register with their team's ID so there's no mix-up. Glenda says that's why she likes birthdays. Thank you, Glenda.
Yeah, by the way, when you set up, you remember Laurel showed you earlier which demographic fields you can include, you can have selected and appear, and it can be as minimal as just their name and the ID. But in many programs, they do include the birthday, and that's something you can set up on your own in there by selecting birth date, because that does distinguish the people with the same names. And there was this other question, which I said was a bit detailed, and maybe we can go ahead and answer it. Where can I find a list of rights under each user group?
I know we have some materials on our website from Summer Institute that go into more of the details about the proctor role and the coordinator role. For those of you that have been able to log into TOPS Pro Enterprise, when you click on those access groups, it will give you some more details on those rights. I'd say the quickest place to look, though, is going to be in the Module 2 for eTest implementation. We have a slide that goes into more details about each of those TE access groups for the roles, which are TE Admin, TE Basic Access, and TE Teacher Access. Those access roles will change slightly depending on if you have a basic TOPS Pro Enterprise account with WTUs or an enhanced TOPS Pro Enterprise account with TEUs. And the nice thing about the access groups, too, is that you don't necessarily have to recreate them. You might just want to understand how the groups function when you're assigning your staff members to different roles within them. So when you begin on eTests, CASAS will set up your account with various testing sessions that are specific to each testing action. So for the first time your students are coming into your program, you'll give them the intake pretest testing session, and that will deliver the appraisal or the locator as well as the appropriate pretest that they'll be taking. When you go to post-test your students, you'll actually use a progress post-test session for ABE or ESL. What that post-test session does is it ensures that the student has a pretest score already, and so it basically uses that next assigned test chart that you would use for the paper testing in order to deliver the next post-test. So if you happen to have the test administration manual at your site because you're using paper tests, that's exactly how our software is coded on eTests. So it doesn't need to be a surprise about what level test your student will take next.
The eTest sampler is, if you go on to any one of those national webinars, you'll see this demonstrated, and as I showed you, you can find it on the website and check it out. I really encourage you to do it. You can give the link to this to your students as even from home, because it's not something they have to do when they're there with you. And in our new interface on eTest, there are plus and minus buttons, so it's much easier than before to enlarge the font size and other aspects. So we've improved the navigation features quite a bit in the last year. There have been updates to the reports, and they're still going on. And so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but just to mention that in the Goals series we have competency reports. Also in the Life and Work series we have competency reports. And you can get them at the student level or at the class level. When you see the word summary, that's the word that indicates it's a class report. But in the Goals series, there's only one competency for each set of questions that relates to the passage itself, and we think that's going to make it easier to interpret these reports. So under the Reports menu, under Test Results, you go to Competency Performance, and you can see this is the individual one. It doesn't say so, but that means but it is. And then when it says summary at the end, that's the class version. If you have the basic access to TOPS Pro Enterprise, you can get the individual reports. And if you have the enhanced access, you can get the summary or class reports. And this is what a student-level report looks like for, in this case, we're looking at a Reading Goals Level C test. And it would show you can see the first four questions are all the same reading passage, and they all relate to the same competency. And they also have the task area, which tells the format of the reading passage, whether it's a chart or a table, which is 2, whether it's a form, or it's text, which is 3. This is a class level version, and in this case what's different is it shows the percent correct that the 13 students in this class got on each of these test questions. Here we have the student performance by competency category. So instead of looking at, I'll just go back up here. Here we have 3-digit competencies that are more specific. But we are encouraging programs to look at the 2-digit level, because then you definitely have enough questions related to that competency category to make some judgments about what they know or don't know about that category. And then here's the class performance version of that. Here we have about content standards, and here's how you get there, content standards, and then you can get the student or the class. And this is, if you go on the website, you'll see our CASAS reading standards. We have a second edition, which is now what these tests are coded to, and these are the numbers of the standards. These are the standards themselves and how many items. So this you can get the report. This is on an individual student of how they did on all these standards, which are very much aligned to the CCR actually also. So that's another way you can understand how students did on a particular test form. Here you can see the class version where you can see the percent correct for these students who took the test. And we did already talk about the individual skills profile, where for one student you can see, and this is on the reading test, we now have the CCR report that is the default report, and it shows you these different categories and subcategories on reading goals. It shows you the related CCR standard, how many items, and the percent correct. And one thing that's coming out on Friday, I was saying earlier, is that we have just, we're about to release the math CCR report that will appear on the individual skills profile. So this is really hot, totally hot off the press. I don't think anybody from CASAS has even seen this yet. But here we have this is a math and reading, individual skills profile, reading, this is the goal series, and here we have, this is new, the math CCR report with the different categories, the N, and the percent correct. So look for that starting on Friday with a new release. So I mentioned earlier that we do have for HiSET, but very soon, looks like possibly in about a month, we'll be able to tell you the likelihood of passing the GED reading and the GED math based on the CASAS goal scores, because it's likely we have enough students now to report out those results. So stay tuned for that. We have some other areas that we are doing research studies and collecting additional data. So if you'd like to help us with that, we would love to include you and have your Texas adult learners included in these studies. And again, it's not too soon to think about possibly coming to California in June for our Summer Institute, which is always a great experience. Just to clarify that, you only get the reports when you have the enhanced access for classes. Otherwise, in basic, you get individual students.
Okay. So at this time, I wanted to let everyone know that we will be posting the chat transcripts in the community of practice for assessments. And also, the PowerPoint will be made available after it has been made accessible. So we'll be posting that shortly thereafter, because it takes a little bit of time. There's a process for that. But they will be posted in the assessment community of practice. Now, Sasha says, just FYI, CASAS customer service has been fantastic. I've learned so much from calling them. I'm sure they memorized my phone number by now.
Thank you, Sasha. All right. Well, anybody from CASAS have any additional comments or things you want to add?
Sasha says, so if teams won't be updated until October, can we enter scores then even if they tested in August? Ooh, is that past one of your data sign-ups?
Hi, this is Mahalia. So the short answer is yes, and we've been trying to kind of keep this on a as-requested basis. But, yeah, you'll be able to go in and update those scores, and if you've already done data validation, then we'll have to work on getting those classes invalidated so that you can update the scores. That's not going to be a problem. I mean, we know what's going on, so we understand.
Risa says the data sign-off is not until October 15th. So hopefully you'll be able to get them in before then.
Yeah, and I'll be very, very honest to that regard. I mean, we're pushing to have this corrected by mid-October, actually, and having regular meetings every single week just on this. If not, we'll come up with, a workaround in terms of if we have to go past the data sign-off that's due October 15th. But right now the goal is to get this kind of released prior to that. But I'll keep you guys posted on the biweekly call.
Thank you, Mahalia. We thank CASAS and TWC for being available for us. There's a lot of great information today.
Thanks to everybody for participating. This was a great turnout, and I really do, I will also reiterate grateful to TWC and the CASAS teams for being available to us and giving us a chance to ask some of these questions.
And thank you all for hosting it. We really appreciated the opportunity to be in touch with you and hear exactly what it was that you wanted to know, and hopefully we've been able to be responsive in a way that's helpful to you all.
Greatly appreciated, the whole CASAS team. We'll have 2 more technical assistance webinars coming up in October about new registration. Thank you, Robert, for that reminder. So we'll have 2 more technical assistance webinars coming up in October. Mark your calendars, October 1st and October 7th. And it's repeats, so it will be a repeat. So if you attend one, you don't have to technically attend the other.
And so we're encouraging, strongly recommending anyone who went to a CASAS TOT to sign up for these trainings, because this will be the new way to register test administrators and trainings. So this is a new process going forward, and more information will be sent out.
Thank you, Robin.